ia mai ko ia no hea to ngana no tua whakarere noa tu puna he mana hiki niko he mana hiki rangi taku piki amukura taku tohu Māori. Koutou ngā manu ki ta paitara ahua whakarongo mai rā. Ko te whiu o te kōrero I whiua ki tari mano ko te ao ngā horo ko te ruahine atawa ke hei moa turi baru. Kia rere ki ingoa ko rangi wewehi ko ngā uri nei takatu nei ki te hāpai ngā mahi a kui mā koro māputa ki te whai au ki te ao Mārama. A kāti rā kai te tihi o te tangata. Kai ngā tai e whae nguru mai nei. Koutou ngā mātāwaka me ngā waiwai tapu ki wainguni a koutou rā. Nau mai, haere mai rā. Haere mai rā ki tēnei tūpuna whare e tūake nei. Nōna te reo, nāna te karanga kia hui ai tātou I tēnei pō. Haere mai. Haere mai e te pāpā. E tika ana ki a mea ko tahi a Pou Temara ka kata te pō. I pēnei aku kōrero nā tā mea. Kai ia koe e rā kōrero tua whakarere. Kai ia koe e tērā mōhiotanga. Kai ia koe e rā pūmanawa tua whakarere. Kai taku rangasira, nau mai. Nau mai rā kōrua. Nau mai rā te tai rāwhiti. Te rā puka, whiti e, ana ko whiti mai te tai rāwhiti ki roti amata. Nā reira, hari ko ana ngā tirangi wewahi, kou mai ki roto I ngā ika pai wai, ki roto I tō mātou hinaki. Te rāpe tērere atu ki wā. Oi au. E hari te mei te whakatōtō I ngā kōrero ki a tātou nei. Engari ai ki e rā kōrero, he ki te ngā kanoi, he hoki o mahara, he hoki ngā mahara, he rere ngā roimata. Nā reira mauri au mai ngā mate huhua kairungi a koutou rā. Hora hia ki te paupira o te whare nei. Kia kahai te ki, korite. Ana tō mātou tuahine I tērā wiki, I whaiwhai haere atu, I te tini I te mano, ki te pōtere. Nā reira, rātau, te mate rehu ki a rātau, tātau, te mata ora ki a tātau, e titoko I te rangi nei, tēnā tātau. A kai aku rangatira, hari te mei te whakatoro ngā kōrero ki a tātau nei. Nei ke te iwi, mai te puko o te arawa, e noho minaka ana ki a rongo I ngā kupu, ka horahia hei te pōne. Nā reira aku rangatira, tēnā kōrua, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Tangi te mai, tangi rere mai, tangi te wara I te tatu, ka riri e. Tangi hia ki anu I te tangi ki te matua ka pai anei, he mate I te marama, he mate hoki mai kia tāwana. Moira wai hone ki te poru ana te whenua ka horo mai koa te tihi ki puhirua ka whatira e te rau o te huia. Ko te tohu o te mate mai. Tā reira rātou ki a rātou te tohu mano, te mate ki a rātou tātou, ki a tātou te tohu o te ora ki a tātou nei. Kei ngā kokongo e whā o te whare. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Tīhina atu rā te pūtaka o ngā kōrero o te wānanga, tīhina atu rā te hautapu o ngā riki. Kaukatutia e tāne te wānanga ki runga ki a mātau ki e nei ruanuku ki e nei ruahine. E nei pūkenga e nei tauira. Kia koe I te matapune ngā mai ni te matapui hoiho. Ka whakamau atu ki reira kia tīnā. Tīnā. Hui e. Ai e.
tū nei, I runga I tō umu puka e takoto mai rā, tūtonu. O ngā kupu kōrero kai runga kai o kōrero ko te tūtana o te puehu ko te kotinga o te kaki I tangata ko te otinga o te kupu kōrero. Ka whakairia ki runga I ngā pakitara I ngā pātū o te whare e tū nei. Tōna whakatau ki he kupu kōrero ka whakairia ki ngā pakitara whare. Nō reira tui ai runga, tui ai raro. Hono ai runga, hono ai raro, hono ai ngā kupu o te whare nei. Kia tūtonu. Hei ngā rangatira, hei te wahaki, mihi mai kia māua, ko taku tuakana e noho nei māua. Kua tae mai nei ki wainganu I a koutou ki tēnei taha o māweta. Ki roto I te waka o te arawa, tēnei te mihi ake nei kia koe, e mihi nei kia māua. Kia mātau ki tō mātau ope, iti kai ke mai nei I tēnei rā. Ka tika, ia tātou ka huihui, ka tūtaki ngā mate o ngā tātua ki ngā mate o te arawa. Ka mutu ko te kōrero o tātou tūpunga ko ngā mate o te arawa mā tātua ka ea, ko ngā mate o ngā tātua mā te arawa ka ea. Kua tae mai tēnei rā, kua mauria mai ngā mate o ngā I tūhoe, kua mauria mai ngā mate o ngā tātua, o ngā tipurau, ki runga I te waka nei I Aotearoa. Hei whakaarotanga mātātau, hei kōrerotanga mātātau. Hei hoki ngā whakamuri o ngā whakaaro. Ko ia hoki te kaupapa I hui ai tātou I tēnei rā, ko te kōrero I ngā kōrero o mua. I ngā kōrero tāukiuki. Ka heria mai e tātou ki te pō, ki te māramataka o te ina ia nei. Nō reira e mihi hei te pōtiki, e mihi kia māua kai whakaike mai nei, ki runga kia koutou. Nā rangatira, tēnā koutou ngā kai pupuri te Māori o tēnei o tātou marae, ngā kai whakamahanga I ngā pai o te hunga kāngaro ki te pō, tēnei te mihi ake ni kia koutou. E tahi o tātou tūtakitaki ai I tēnā wā, I tēnā wā. I tēnei rā, nā te kaupapa hui tangata ora tātou I karanga kia hui tātou, nō reira koe nei te mihi ki te kaupapa nāna tātou I whakahui tēnei rā. Nō reira koe ni ngā mihi ake kia tātou, ngā whakatau ake kia tātou. Kia ora hoki koutou, koe ke mai nei koutou ki te whakarongo ki te kaupapa. Nei māua ko taku tuakana te haere mai nei. I runga I tērā o tātou waka. Ia horo uta rā ko mā tātua koe ke mai tēnei rā. E mihi ana kia koutou. Kia o kawapea te āhua wā tātou mahi. Ka whai wāhi ai ki te mihi ki tēnā o koutou, ki te ringaringa ki tēnā o koutou. Engari hoki mai kia koutou ki te pai tapu tēnei, te mihi ake nei kia koutou. Tēnā koutou kia ora tātou katoa. Akura koe Ngāwa ki te whare Ka moro takahi Te whare o te kahi katoa Hey, what the
Kai ku papa, tēnei te mihi nui kia kōrua. A kōrua e tōtō nei, ai te nua nei, a ki tō tō tatau whare, i a tawa ke e tū nei. A kia ngā wari mai, a hau tēnei, tiki a kia nei tēnei, a tahi ka tīmata waku kōrero, a nā runga i tina karai te hi e kia, tū paupau hale waku papa. A kōra ko haupa te mea, me te tuara hawe, a kua tēnei tua kene. A ka hua hau te pūkau, whakahale nei te rangi me kō wai. Ka le ko hau, ko taibu, le ko moeka, ko hapi te rau, ko te ore, le ko pātete. Ue ko te umu e tūna i te rangi. E ue hiana ki o rangi ka hui. E huke ana he maranga i ka ole, ko te whanaka i tangata. Kororo tahi hia e kōrua te taha ki o tatau mate. Anko Pou, ka wea mai te mate, o koro paki. Ki roto ki tōna whare. E whai wā au ki te tangi ki aia. Me taku whakapāha nui ki a koe, kā rai hui tai ake. Pō turi rawa ngā taringa o tēnei i rā mutu o. Engari ka wea mai te rā mate. A koe kei te pāpai a Monty, ka wea mai ngā mate roto i a koe. Ki ngā mate huhua o ngā tirangi wewe. Ki ngā mate huhua o tarau. E mate tonu nei, e mate tonu nei. Tika nā ngā koro taku pāpā. Ka tahi. Engari te koro mai taku kraua ki au. Ko tahi anake, te rongoa, te kaupapa mate. Ira, ko tēnei, ko te kaupapa ora. Tēnā rawa tu koutou, kōrua, ko tau, ko pēnei mai, te tōtō mai tēnei kaupapa ora ki roto ki tōku whare. E ki ei te ngākau, i te aroha, e ki ei te wairua, i te mātauranga. E whai wai, e nei roi mata, te maroke. Hara mai. Ka mātā waka i roto i a koutou, ka wea mai. Tā puke mai ki wahora. Maunga pō hatu panekire. Hihurangi maunga. Hara mai. Hara mai ki taku maunga popoto. E tū mai rā pukeroa. Pukerua ki wete. Hara mai ki tōku awa. Ngā kupu, ngā Pou Orakau, ngā kupu, ngā tito ngai roto i ngā tau. He mea humai ai. So Uncle Pou, pēnā kāre i reka ki a koe wete heo ngā tito ngai roto i ngā tau. Ara, o te awa te he. Ngari hara mai anko. Hara mai ki te kāinga rua o te wehi. Ka te anō ka kuhu ki aure mai te whatitokarara. Engari ko te mea nui. Ka wea mai ngā kōrero. Ka wea mai e rā kupu i roto i a kōrua. Kōrua ngā tohunga. Ki te oroi. Ki te whatu. Ki te raranga. Ki te whakairo. Ki te whakaniko-niko i tēnei mea te kupu. Ka wea mai. Ka wea mai hei oranga. Mo tōku iwi mo ngā tirangi wawehi. Mo tōku iwi mo tarawa. Ia we tiro hārana ki te nea ui nā mātā waka kua pāe mai nei. Hei oranga mo te iwi Māori. Me taku mea ke. Kōrua. A kōrua mai. He mea tāhua. He mea whakaora. He mea whakakipa i te hunga rangatahi. He mea whakakipa i te hunga pere ia. Te hunga rangatahi. Engari rā. He mihi nui tēnei ki a kōrua i a kōrua mai. Anko ka hoki atau ki a koe. Ko mihi kētia e hau. A Timoti. Engari kei te mihi au ki a koe. Te nui o ngā mahi. Ko oti a koe te whakaako i tōku iwi e ngā tirangi wawahi. Ki te whakairo i tēnei mea te kupu. I puta atu ki roto ki a koe. Ki roto ki a koutou. I hoki mai ki te kāinga. Ki te whāngai i e rā hua ki a mata. Rere ki a koe. Heo tira ki a kōrua. Ai te pāpā. Te nui o ngā pukapuka e rua, ka tahi anō au kārongo, ko oti a koe te tuhitu. Me te ata hua hoki. Heo tira, ki te anau, te nui ngā te rumanei, pēnei mai ki te whakarongo ki a kōrua, kaua ki a mata. Ko pōngia te pā, ka mutu aku kōrero i konei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
E noho ana i runga i tōku tau mata i te heia.
Maura wa te whakaro he aha tēnei e patuki ake nei te rā koa ko ngani ho te o peke haua e aru kori kona i waho te kohanga wai o awa hau ko ngā tā
pui kākahua e rohoki e makanoa te piri ki te taha ko puhirua e aira te titiro ki waho ko tarimana ki ngā wei kare kare i oriki ai a kahu uira o te tangata e mau maira i te motu tapu atini rau i toto pea i te kawa hei ngaki tau mō tapu tūpuna mo tawa ke hei moa tū mā kona e ara e tauana. E. Ko ho mai ki te tute mai.
Nā me pau. Nā tāhu te ki te kantaea. Monty. Tēnā koe.
Ei, aha po te kaupapa. Po te kaupapa.
Tēnā. Kia ora. Ai, ata.
Koia wai, koia koro ana.
Are you going home or?
I should be. It's a long day for you. I think they're going to win this.
Yeah, we're gonna need
Use this one.
bring these green ones, we'll flip them around so they're facing that way and I'll set all the microphones.
Oh, all done. Oh, great.
Oh, this mostly going as far that way as possible.
Michael, can you give us a...
Bring that forward.
Oh, I don't have my name still in your...
Yeah, this is just going out of the...
Let's be helpful. Let's be helpful.
Black and white one. Oh, there behind you. Oh. No, you sit there because I'm going to watch the picture. What a lovely So take your direction from straight up.
Test one, testing, testing, one.
he said he's just going to signal where he's got all this. Kia ora tātou. Tēnā koe. Me rapu tētahi wāhi pai mo te noho kia kite koe i ngā mahi o te pōnei. Don't worry about where you're sitting, no matter where you're sitting, you've got to be caught on camera. Okay, so don't try and hide at the back. All right. We'll catch you. Okay? Okay. Koe anō tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. I tō tātou nei whare, ata waka heimoa, tēnā koutou I haere tawhiti mai, tēnā koutou I haere tata mai, ki te kaupapa mō tēnei pō, mō tēnei wiki me ki, arā ko te tuhi, te kupu, hei kapi I ngā kōrero o tātou tūpuna, hei aki I ngā taiohi, mō ngā rā kei te tū mai, ki mua I a tātou, nō reira he mihi nui kia koutou, ngā manuhiri, kia koutou, te rōpū whakahaere o tēnei huihuinga I te wiki nei. Hoi anō kia pai te pōnei, he mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Hoi anō I whakaro ana hau, me pehe ngā kōrero mo te toko rua nei. Kārehe kupu, atu I ngā kupu I roto I te puka. Hoi anō, whakaro ana hau he tino pai, te mauri mai o te kaupapa o te tuhi hitori, ki roto o ngā tirangi wiwi, ki roto I tēnei o ngā whare. I te mea ko tō mātou tūpuna, a wi maihi te rangi kāheke, tētahi o ngā Māori tuatahi, ki te tuhi I ngā kōrero o tātou tūpuna, ana iri ana aia ki te pakitara o te wharenei. Nō reira, he kaupapa tino nui, he kaupapa tino nui kia hau. I te mea, ko era taku kaupapa I a hau I te whare wānanga, ko te mahi hitori, me taku whakaro kia rahi ake ngā Māori e tuhi nei I o tātou kōrero. Anā ko ngā rangatira I tēnei pō. Nō reira, ka kōrero mai tā Pou Temara I te tuatahi, ka tahi ka whai wā mo te tuku pātai ki aia, ka mutu, ka huri kia takuta Monty, kei aia te wahanga tuarua, ka tahi ka mutu ngā mahi o tēnei whare, ka haere mātou ki tērā whare, tātou katoa ki tērā whare. Nō reira, tēnā koe I te pāpā, nui ana mahi mo te whakarauora reo, mo te whakāko I te reo, kia tātou nei. I te wā I pātai mai a te mākoha ki ahau, māku tēnei wahanga e whakarite, e hoki aku mahara ki aku kaiako, ko whatarangi tētahi, i te wānanga o Raukawa, whatarangi rāua ko Pātariki te rei. Rāua tahi i aki mai kia mātou ngā tauira o tērā wā. Kia kaue haere ki tētahi hui Māori me te kore mau atu he puka puka he pene. Nō reira, kei au taku puka puka me taku pene mō ngā kōrero nui o te pōnei. Nō reira, koutou kei ngā kokongoa tēnei whare, tēnā koutou, tēnā koe te papa.
E hine, tēnā koe e mihi nei ki au. Tēnā koe e whakapau hunei i ngā mahi kua mahi e au, kua o ti au. Ai, e rā mahi e rā. Ko te kaupapa o tēnei rā. O tēnei pō, he kōrero, he whakanui i ngā kaituhi kupu, kōrero, o nehe, te hunga o mua, te hunga o nāia nei, me te hunga e ara ake ana i ngā rā kaimui a tātou. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi ake nei kia koutou, e mihi ana hoki kia koutou, ki ngā kaituhi kōrero, kua hui mai nei, i tēnei pō. Ka rau te tino mōhio he hara, he reo mōku, me mautonu au, ki te reo Māori, me huri rānei ki te reo Pākehā, me kōrero rānei i ngā reo ērua. E pai ana kia koutou, nā mea ērua, ne? Ai, nō reira tēnei te mihi ake nei kia koutou. So, I'm very pleased to be here this evening, to be part of this celebration for Māori writers of Māori history of the past, of the present, and Māori histories writers of the future. You'll be watching a rolling PowerPoint presentation. That presentation, I may not speak to it directly, but it's a PowerPoint that forms the basis of the people that motivated me to write about the Tūhoe view of the Battle of Orakau in 1864. The people who inspired me to write the Tūhoe view on that particular battle, the people that motivated them, who had something to say about the Battle of Orakau in 1864. The chiefs and the rangatira who were part that led to that great battle. As a battle, it was almost a non-event. But for the investing forces, we are led to believe, we have been taught in schools, we have been taught in books, we've read in books, it was a great victory for the colonial forces. And it lauded the colonial forces, spoke about them, spoke about their leaders, and said very little about the opposing forces made up of Māori tribes that took part in that battle. You see, it takes two to make a war, to make a battle, and I suppose we have to abide by the culture that history, especially where it involves war, battles, is a history written by the victor. And so it was with Orakau. Ko tētahi o ngā kaupapa o Orakau ia mātou e tipu ake ana. Those things that the history writers of the battles between Māori and Pākehā wrote about were things that seemed that were important to the writers of history, to the non-Māori writers of history. But for Māori, they had a different view of those things which mattered. They had a different view of the things that, for them, made sense. And so it was, when I was growing up, we heard a lot about Orakau. And some of the people that you will see on this rolling vision that you'll see in front of you are some of the people that spoke about these the Battle of Orakau. They saw people. They talked with people who were survivors of the Battle of Orakau. They were brought up by people who took part in that battle. I was unfortunate that the last person in my family who took part in that battle, a survivor of the of Orakau, died 12 years before I was born. So my mother spoke with her great-grandmother that took part in the Battle of Orakau. One of the things about Orakau, ia mātou e tipu ake ana, and I again reiterate that we knew about Orakau as we were growing up in the 40s, 50s and 60s, because our kaumātua spoke about it. They always spoke about it. For instance, let me just give you an example. On the 25th of, on Anzac Day, there are celebrations to remember those who took part in the First World War and the Second World War. And for those tūhoe of our kaumātua who didn't take part in either of those two wars, they'd make remarks like, ka pēhea ke mātou nā toenga o Orakau. What about us, the survivors of Orakau? So we got to hear about these comments and to learn from these comments, because during those times they would talk, our kaumātua would talk about Orakau, the things that mattered to them. The actual battle itself, they didn't talk too much about that, but they talked about going to the battle. They talked about coming back from the battle. They talked about the things that were said leading up to the battle. They talked about the things that were said during the battle. That's not given too much. That's not written about in any volume at all by non-Māori writers. And that was always something that interested me. Ka whakaarau, he ahara ngā kōrero o mātou tipuna. What did they say? What did they think as people died? What did they think? What did my tipuna, te whenua nui, who led, who was the rangatira, the whakapapa, the rangatira who had the whakapapa that led the tūhoe group to Orakau. What did he think when he lost his daughter, when his daughter died? Those things that are important to Māori were not written about by the non-Māori writers. By Eldon Best, he didn't spend too too much talking. He didn't even mention the names of the people who died, especially the women, and the reasons for their going to Orakau. Those things interested my generation of Tūhoe people growing up in the 40s, 50s and early 60s. And they talked about this. A crow of mine, and I'll point them out to you. In fact, a kuia, a crowa, a grand-uncle, and my kuia's husband, they lived with people who were part of the Battle of Orakau. So they were getting the battle firsthand from these people who took part in the battle, the survivors of Orakau. One of them, a kuia, let me just review the whakapapa. Te whenua nui had te mauniko. Te mauniko had her daughter had my grandmother. And she was never caught on camera because she had this deep felt fear and hatred for Pākehā. And that was my tipuna kuia, te mauniko. And that filtered down to her granddaughter, Pareraututu, who brought me up. And when I was a child, whenever Pākehā showed up, oh, there, I can't see it on my, on this, there she is on the left at the back there, that's, and that's me, that's my mother holding me, and that was taken in 1948. And my grandmother at the back there was brought up by Paitini. If we can go to a shot of Paitini. There he is, and Paitini was one of the main informants to Elsden Best about things Māori and about Orakau. A learned man, a man who had this great memory. He is recorded as, he is written about as knowing over 400 waiata from Tūhoe, and those waiata were recorded. So, and for them, for that generation, for his generation, that was not unusual. They used their memories because they were only learning to write. This person ended up with many writing a lot of things in his manuscripts, some of which I have in my possession at the moment. Many of those books came into the possession of my Ngāti Pikiao relations, and when he moved to live here in Rotorua, he brought the books with him, but he brought them back to Ruatahuna when he knew he was dying. Te Tārehu Solomon, one of the from the Te Piki Kōtuku whakapapa. Now, this person here took part in the in Orakau, and one of the great feats about this is that they went there on horses, and funny enough, I was talking to one of the historians who has just written the last forays of Te Kōti. And I was saying to him that the historians did not record that our people from Ruatahuna actually went to Orakau on horses. And that, the little details like that mattered to people from the bush did not find any space in the written history of Tūhoe, but they rode horses to Orakau. And one of the things that happened was that they came across the horses. These are the investing forces of Orakau, came across the horses and shot them or scattered them and shot the people who were in charge of looking after the horses. The horses were tethered some way away from the scene of the battle. So what did these people do? When they fled Orakau after the third day of defending Orakau, they walked back, and many of them were wounded. They walked back. Some of them died on the way back, but the vast majority of those who left Orakau actually made it back, walked back to Ruatahuna, a long way from Orakau to Ruatahuna. And this person talks about being wounded in two places, but it was as if it was nothing, and he says, almost without any feeling at all, yeah, all I did was get a stick and walk back to Ruatahuna. Yeah. And I thought, gee, no wonder I'm tough. Anyway, this is what he said, that he brought up my grandmother, whāngaid my grandmother. So I make the point, she would have known about Orakau, because that person would have talked about Orakau, and she would have known about Orakau. So what she told me, what I heard her talk about Orakau, can be taken as first-hand information from the Battle of Orakau. But getting back to our kuia, who had this hatred of and fear of Pākehā, my kuia and I, that person there, we moved into the heart of Te Urewera and lived there, and we'd hear dogs barking, and depending on how the dog barked, you could either tell whether it was a Māori or non-Māori. And the dogs, when they started growling and snarling, Pākehā, Pākehā. So she'd grab me, and get it, ew, harama, ew. So we'd disappear and melt into the bush, and spy the Pākehās from the bush. I wanted to meet the Pākehās. Well, she wouldn't have anything to do with Pākehās. It wasn't as if she was afraid of Pākehās, but it was one of those things that was bred in her, to fear Pākehās. We feared Pākehā, or she feared Pākehā. I didn't, because I'd met enough Pākehās as when I was growing up, and they had lollies. So for me, Pākehās brought good things, lollies. But my grandmother, until we moved out of the bush in 1954, came back to Ruatahuna, and then she had to engage with Pākehā because the doctor was a Pākehā. And the doctor had to, but as soon as that doctor stopped, I was gone. I was hiding here. It's just one of those natural reactions that you did. So it was kind of bred into you. Kia mataku I te Pākehā, fear the Pākehā, fear them. And, here I am, 76 years later, and I have no fear of Pākehā. I will challenge Pākehā. In fact, this book is a challenge to Pākehā. This is my book. This is my story. This is Tūhoe's view of what happened at Orakau. And I'm telling it from a Tūhoe point of view that you failed to write about. And many of the writers were great friends of mine. They continue to be friends of mine. A couple of them have died. Angela Ballara and I were great friends. We were both from Victoria University, and she used to be a great critic of Elsden Beast. Let me tell you about Elsden Beast. He lived. Photograph of Heipipi, please, Mataya. He lived at Heipipi, and he lived, that's Elsden Beast there, and he lived with Paitini, and Paitini lived at Heipipi, and Heipipi is where I was born. And so I have this connection with Elsden Beast. That's where we lived. And there, Elsden's kauta was just this side of that house that I was brought up in. And that's my connection to her. I found myself defending Elsden Beast because Angela Ballara was a great critic of Elsden Beast. She didn't spare Elsden Beast, and were quite critical of Elsden Beast. And I felt, you know, this kind of Māori closeness, whakapapa to someone, and I felt that I had to defend Elsden Beast, and I defended Elsden Beast in a debate at Victoria University. And I have to say, because of the power of my debate, I won. But in the end, I had to agree with her later on and say to her, no, you know, I've actually analysed what you're saying, that bloody Elsden Beast, he was a racist, you know, because he wrote the book to her in 1925, huge book. It was his view on Tūhoe. But the good thing about Elsden, he recorded everything. If you said something, he wrote it down. And he included it in his book. And it could be written by the great historians of Tūhoe, the great rangatira of Tūhoe, but for Elsden Beast, this is his view, but this is how it actually was. He'd give his Pākehā view on how it ought to have been. So people like Tūtaka Ngahau, a great historian, great whakapapa person, he was the person that gave rise to the noble savage. He knew a lot. He was learned, but he was still a savage. Although he knew a lot, we'll give him the title noble. But I started to have this dislike for Elsden Beast, and a great Angela and I became great friends, and I wrote this poroaki to Angela when she died, and it was a heartfelt poroaki. The other one, of course, was Judith Binney. Judith and I were great mates. In fact, I took her back to Ruatoki, and my grandaunt gave her the name, her Māori name, and she carried her Māori name. She loved her Māori name. But she and I talked, and I used to say to her, you didn't say much about my Orakau when you wrote about Orakau, you gave the Pākehā view about Orakau. Even you, Judith, gave the Pākehā view about Orakau, and she agreed. And that was just a discussion between she and me. And when she died, I was brave enough to actually say, well, this is what she said, and I don't actually agree with it. But she is still my friend, and I'll probably have great talks with her when I meet her in Rorohenga. So, so Orakau is the Te Rau Takitahi is what I think, what I believe to be the Tūhoe version of Orakau. Many people have from Tūhoe, because of the inclusion of whakapapa to those people who went to Orakau, people of whose tipunas have died, whose kuias and crowers have died, have written and says, thank you for that. I didn't know that I was related to this person who went to Orakau. And, you know, that's a great thing. They have this connection with Orakau. Some have said, you did not include our whakapapa, our family in your whakapapa. And I says, oh, yeah, forgive me. I'm not known as an expert in whakapapa. I'm pretty good, but not the expert that you might expect me to be. So, you can include yourself in that whakapapa. So, yeah. So, so these are the things that are happening. But other books that I'm now writing, it's about history. It's about the things that the elves and beasts of the world like to be critical about. But Maori people find it is a real part of their culture. It is the Tohunga book that I am writing, and it's taking me a while to write about that, because some things you can write about, like Orakau. I can write about that without too much problem, without any problems at all. But the Tohunga book, you're talking about what you know, you're talking about what Tohunga's taught you, and sometimes these things are tapu. And I always have this struggle as to whether I should tell that story or that I shouldn't. And what's prompted me to tell it, in many of my, I've been an academic for 47 years, and continue to be an academic and a professor, a practicing professor at Awanuiarangi. And I've been talking about these things for 47 years to students. I now see the things that I've talked about being mentioned in books that my students have written, and some of them have forgotten to source where they got that from. And I've written to them and said to them, there's in our world, there's this thing called plagiarism. I can actually do a lot of damage for you. And so there's this great, hurry to put the record straight. But that's coming out. I just thought, if I don't write it, then it's going to be written for me. And it's either going to be written for me by a Māori or a non-Māori. So I'd better write it myself. I just think about the great historians, Henare Tūwhāngai, the great tohunga, the dean of the tohungas, who took Te Māori to America and made Māori art, high-end art, as opposed to the art of the Stone Age people, of the uncivilized. It's now considered high-end art. And that only happened in 1984. So, Henare Tūwhāngai, the Dean of the Tohungas in 1984, who has written his story. He died without leaving his karakia behind. He died without leaving his kōrero behind. Or maybe he did, but hasn't been written. And Ruka Broughton had this to say to the last of the Whanganui Tohungas in 1983. He said, "E rangi, kei te kite ake au he wā kato tata te tō te rā ki a koe. Ko ngā kai katoa kai roto i tō puku, i nā mate koe, mate atu o kai me koe. Mate atu o mōhiotanga me koe." And this kaumātua says, ai, tika. He says, te maumau, te maumau. E rangi, anei tō mokopuna. Whakahoroa o mātauranga ki tō mokopuna. And that's what he did. He went away and thought about this kaumātua. He was going to die with all his knowledge. And he had great knowledge. I saw that kaumātua. I sat with him. He interviewed me. He talked about the karakia of my waka mātātua that I had no knowledge of. And neither did the people of my own waka had no knowledge of. So he was a great learned man. He was talked about as the last tohunga of the Whanganui River. So I would hope that that knowledge has filtered down to younger tohungas who are operating at the moment, and I thought that I should write that book. So I'm trying to bring this to a close. I said I would talk for 25 minutes, and I'm 2 minutes away from that. There are many things that I've recorded from the 1960s, and I've just had all those tapes, boxes and boxes of tapes, you know, the real tapes, and I used to take these things, old technology, and play it to my students, and they were interested in you know, those those things, those walkie things that you used to run around with and play a tape on. Well, for the students in my last year at Waikato University, used to be amazed, where can you get one of those from Matua? Yeah, and yet, you know, they had computers that and YouTube that they could get these things from. But yeah, all those had been digitized, and just going through that and taking all the kōrero from that, from the kaumātua, the learned kaumātua, the last of whom into her died in 1986. And I always sought the company of kaumātua and kuia. And I was always uncomfortable about talking with my own generation. Until 1986, I was forced to talk to my own generation, because the generation that I was used to, the kuias and crows, simply died out. No more. I was forced to talk to my own generation. Nō reira, I hope this was of some value to you. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe e te matua. Hoi anō tai te wā, ka tai te tuku pātai ki aia. Ina he pātai o te kauara.
Ai, pātai mai. Hei.
What advice do you have? We have in this room some, you know, budding writers, aspiring writers, some experienced writers. What advice do you have for writers today in recording history and, you know, the kinds of stories that they know?
The advice that I have is, if you have a story, write it. If you have a story, write it. Just write it. Just put the words down on your computer, and there's technology around that will fix your words up. Or you can take it. This book, the book that I wrote, Anaha, a student of mine, Anaha Hini. He was one of the editors. He edited the Māori in that book, and because Anaha is Anaha, anything that he didn't understand, he just questioned it. And after a while, I complained to the publisher that Anaha making me hoa. He's questioning everything, but you know, that was his job. And you'd be hard put to find a fault in the language of that book, because he questioned everything. And then it went to other editors. The last editor was a group of 3 women, and one of them, the leader, was a German woman. And her job was to look at all the commas. She put the finishing touches to it. Put where the commas should go, or she questioned whether the comma that I had put in ought to have been there. So I thought about her as the comma editor But she knew her job. So you can bet that all the commas that are in that book are where they ought to be. And the thing that amazed me was, kare te wai nerai mohi o te kōrero Māori. And yet, what made her, gave her the ability to put the comma in the Māori language where she thought it ought to go. But when I looked at it, it made sense where that comma ought to have been, where she put that comma. So yes, so just to answer that question, just put it down on paper, budding writers, just put it down on paper, because there are people around, Māori people, non-Māori people, who will fix your language up for you and turn it into a publication.
Kia ora e te pāpai. E hara he pāpai. Kei te mohi o mātou, ta hāpuri o nongotaha, tokorua ngā whānau, kua heke mai nei i te tūpuna karaua a tūtaka ngāhau. Ko te tihi o te whānau e noho nei, ko te whānau tuki waho. Nā rātou i ki mai ki a hau ko te rā whānau tūtaka ngāhau. Oh, okay, I'm not going to argue. The other family was my brother-in-law who just passed away last month, and that's the family Colbert. They actually had the photo of the karaua, and we had him at his place, then we shipped it over to Waititi Marae, Ngāti Ngārara Nui, and I was asked if I knew who the karaua was. And I said, you asking me? I said, I can tell you. They have the photo of the karaua Tūtaka Ngāhau. Now, I'm just going to touch on the book of Ngā Tamariki o Te Kohu. I've only seen Elsden Best and Tūtaka Ngāhau. Your karaua, I haven't seen any writings of him, unless they were both in the same book. There were actually two. They were sold as one lot. This was going back when some of them weren't even born. You know, some of our nieces and nephews. And that's all I wanted to say. It's an acknowledgement of our tūhoi connection, maybe. Thank you.
Kia ora. Yeah, Tūtaka Ngāhau, he tangata pai tērā, he only ever had one wife. He wasn't like the other rangatiras like Te Whenua Nui who had several. But I think for the Ngāti Rangipuwehi descendants of Tūtaka Ngāhau, I think is a nice story about Tūtaka Ngāhau. He didn't go to Orakau. He did not go to Orakau. And but interestingly, his wife did. His wife went to Orakau, and took part in many battles, in the Te Koti battles and the battles prior to Orakau. But his wife was described by Elsden Best as Herculean in build and in strength, and she was a wrestler, and yeah, she could fight, and so and he talked. Elsden records her as the male warrior carrying one rifle, but her name just escapes me. But Tūtaka Ngāhau's wife would carry two rifles. That's she, and she left him at home and said, "Well, you stay home, look after the kids. I'm going to war." And so she went. So you know, and these are the questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to reveal. Why did the women go with their husbands? I mean, there were, I think, 8 women, as I recorded, who went with their, not many, The other thing, of course, in talking about the 8 women, they don't seem many, but when you consider that I think Elton Best gave a false number about the number of people who fought, number of tūhoe, who fought at Orakau. That is why it was called Te Rau Takitahi. The name Rau Takitahi, in it is contained the word Rau, the 100. Takitahi, single. It means, it tells that there were only a few of tūhoe who actually went to the Battle of Orakau. They didn't even represent hapu. They went as whānau groups, and they didn't consider that they might die at Orakau. Just because one family member went, another family member thought, I better go too, without giving it much thought. I always had this view that the women must have gone with their husbands or with their father, thinking that it was a picnic, it was an exciting thing to do. But I've come to the conclusion they actually knew what they were getting themselves in. They were going to war. They were ready to war, and they were ready to make war. And of course, my kuia records that they fought. They fought as hard as the men did. If someone was wounded, they just grabbed the gun and started shooting. They fought. And coming away, running, escaping Orakau, the women were also very active in fighting as they broke out of Orakau. So they didn't go there because it was an exciting thing to go, that it was a picnic. They went knowing that they were going to war, that they might die. Karahi era?
I mea mai koe I roto I te pukapukara, he rere ke te tirohanga o te Māori ki te tirohanga o ngā kaituhi Pākehā mō ngā o ira mahi. He ha te rere kētau?
Kua kōrero I etahi rere kētanga ko ngā mea e hia ana ngā Māori nā whakatipuranga o muri nei ki te mōhio, kāre I tuhia. Ngā ingoa o ngā kuia, o ngā wāhine I haere, ngā ingoa o ngā tāngata I haere. He nui taku rangahau haere I ngā mea I haere, nā roto tonu I ngā kōrero, a ngā kai kōrero I tuhia e au, I rekoatatia e au I runga I aku tape recorders, I maua I au. Ko etahi, e harai te mea, I whakae au ki ngā ingoa katoa o ngā mei haere. Ka awi no e atan hau ki te ata titiro mēnā I haere rātau. Pēnei a tūtaka ngā hau nei, ko etahi ki I haere a tūtaka ngā hau kāo, kā rea tū I haere. Ko ira te tahi rere kētanga, and it was about feelings. How did they feel when they left Orakau? Why things that matter to us Māori. I Nāia nei, when we gather, we like to talk about ngā mea kua mate. We remember them. And tangihanga is a great process that we use to rid ourselves of the mamae. And I just asked the question, well, how did Te Whenua felt when his daughter died? How did the older sister feel when the younger sister died? How did Paitini feel when his father died? His father was the one that went to war, and Paitini decided he was going too. How did they feel when their father died? His younger brother disappeared. They thought he had died. That a stray bullet had killed him as they escaped to Orakau. But what he had done was he had gone back to look for their father, Te Whatu, found him and buried him. And for all the people who died at Orakau, nā Māori, hundreds of them who died, they were just given a mass burial. And the priests of the Hahi, Mihingare, felt sorry for them and disinterred them and gave them a Christian burial in Te Awamutu, the ones they could find. So, who were they? They weren't recorded, that died. But you can bet the soldiers who died, they were all recorded. Aye.
Tēnā koutou. I'm going to scoop up the last question for myself. The reason I'm going to do that is when one must never get offside with the kitchen, and we still have Monty to go, but also I think we have a fine question as the final question, which is coming from someone who's watching online. Lest you feel a little disappointed in the numbers, there are rather a lot more than you can see who are watching. So the question is, does conjecture form a large part of recording Māori history in your experience?
Can you repeat that again?
It is, does conjecture form a large part of recording Māori history in your experience?
Does conjecture?
Yes.
Yeah, one of the things...
It's come from James Taylor.
Yeah. One of the things that in my favour is that, as I said, I've been an academic for 45 plus years, and I'm always aware of conjecture. If there's conjecture, then you must go in and research it to the best of your ability. There are lots of people that went to Orakau that I don't have any stories about, but I do have their whakapapa. I'm not too sure who they were, what they did. And if there was no recorded or no history about them, that's what I said. There's nothing to be said about them. And hopefully someone would, following me, would find, will unearth the history about this particular person. So you leave that in abeyance. Conjecture, yeah, conjecture is dangerous, and we shouldn't do that. Good boy.
Kia ora tātou, hoi anō ko te wahanga tuarua, kei Dr. Monty Soutar. Ko tētahi o ana mahi i aia i te Ministry of Culture and Heritage, ko tērā pai tuku, te mana o te reo. Me he mea he tangata koe e ako ana i te reo, me haere ki tērā wahanga o te pai tuku, te mana o te reo. Ki reira ka ki te hitori o tō tātou reo, te ngarotanga atu me te whakarauora ake anō te reo, he wāhi tino pai. Just talking about conjecture, a few years ago I was in the north with my husband's people and working with the Kura Kaupapa Māori in Matauri Bay, and we were doing some collection of stories from there. And one of the things that I heard up there was that the name, the 28th Māori Battalion, came from the 28th of October, te rā o te whakaputanga. And I thought, that sounds weird. So I was like, who, ko wai ka mōhio? So, and I heard this from my husband, and I also heard it from his father. So I thought, oh, okay. So I was thinking, who can I ask? So tuku reta au ki te Ministry of Culture and Heritage. tētahi Pākehā I reira I whakautu mai me tiki. We don't know, but we're going to ask Dr. Monty Soutar. I was like, okay, ka tau ka whakautu mai te tangata me tiki. Dr. Monty Soutar said, no, it's got nothing to do with te whakaputanga. That's conjecture. Hoi anō, kei te pono tonu ana a Ngāpuhi. koira te take I te paina te rua tekau mā waru. Hoi anō, kei a Dr. Monty Soutar.
Conjecture, you want to switch to fiction, and then you don't have a problem. E hika mā, kāti tuakea o te huinga me ki rungi a koutou, I whakatau mai nei a mā ko taku kutoa kana a tāpau. Nā reira, Ngāti Rangi Wewehi, te arawa waka, te nā koutou I roti tō koutou whare. Ana pene, tēnā koe I whakapuare tēnei wahanga o te pō. Kei te mihi atu ki a koutou Ngāti Rangi Wewehi, te wātuatai I rungo au tērā ingoa, I te whare wānanga mesi au, he tau I rau I tau oa. Ka tai mai Anaru Grant, anu rau ko Donna ki Pāmutana. I whakakaukau o mātou hoa ki roto I tētai kapahaka. Ko tō mātou kai ako I te haka ko moni tau maunu he kraua no te tai rāwhiti. I taua wā he pōhe he nōku ko Ngāti Prau anake te iwi moe o ki te haka. Engari, ki tau I Anaru, hau tērā tangata mo te maurākau me te haka, mau ke te wehi. Mai tērā wā ki nāinei ka mihi ake au ki a Rangi Wewehi, ngā tō mo te haka, me ngā waiata. He tō anō hoki Anaru mo te prei riki, I prei mātou mo te tai tima ko rangi tāna te ingoa. Engari I taua wā, he kore take raua ngā warriors. Kua huri te ao e nāinei. Ko huri te ao kei rungono atu rātau. Ko te tūmanako, ko te hākari hei te pō te rāhoroi, ka mutu I mui te timatanga o te kēmu. Kāti, ka huri ki te kaupapa o te wiki nei, kei te mihi atu ki a Robin. Nā hau te karanga, Robin, ko tai mai au I rungi taua karanga. Mō tunu au, mātou katoa, he ua te whakahaere e hui pēnei nei, mo te rongo o te wiki, koe nei tō koutou hui tuarua mō kupu. Nā reira, tēnā koe. Ki te mei kore koutou me tō rōpu, me pehe tātou katoa ngā kaituhi Māori. Ka kite au I roto I tēnei ruma, wetahi kaituhi āwhero, me wetahi no kāre no pē, kia whakai me, koe nei te hurahi marātau, te whai atu I te tui hitori Māori. Ko te tumanako, mā ko tāpau kupu, he āwhini a koutou. Pringi au te mihi ki a rangitihi. Kei wheki a koe? Ki te ngatu iaia, he hoki ngā mahara ki aia, mā ko tako tuakana I te wā I a rawa I te whare wānanga o Messi. Ko ai ka mōhio I taua wā, e rangiti, koe nei tō huarahi. Nā reira tēnā koe te chairman o te tarati a Kupu. Me te mihi anō ki a tāpau, he hōnere nōku, te tū tahi aia, te kauhau atu ki a koutou. Tōhunga aia ki te reo, ngā tikanga, me tōna puka mō rākau. Nā reira, I runga I tēnā mihi, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa I rupeka mai nei I roti tēnei whare. Ka reo e hia te tōtu atu ki a koutou, nei te huarahi me pirangi koutou te tui hitori a Māori. Engari, māku e whakātu atu ki a koutou tōku huarahi, mai I tōku taiohitanga taino mai ki nāinei, ngā puka nāku I tuhi, he hāpai I te kaupapa, he āwhina I a koutou. So I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of my writing life. how I got to it, and try and inspire those of you who might have it in your heads that you might want to write one day. I tipu ake au i Hiro Harama, i Rua Tōrea. I haere au te kuro i Hiro Harama me Manutahi. I taua wā, kore rawa he pukapuka i roti aua kura. Kare au I ki te tetai Māori roti, tetai kaupapa Māori roti aua pukapuka. You know, the first book I ever read was called Grandma Comes to Stay. And some people who are old enough, we all had to read that. And it was about a grandmother coming to see her mokopuna, Pākehā, on a Viscount. That's the first time I heard the word Viscount. A Viscount airplane. And landing at an airport and then being taken to see the family. You know, in Ruatoria, 98% of us were Māori in my class. We'd never been to Gisborne. Back in those days, you didn't really go out of your valley, only to school. And I'd never seen an airport, didn't know what a Viscount was, and our nanny would never be flying on one, is what I thought, because we couldn't afford it. But that was how foreign what I read at school was to my reality in a Māori community. And I think, as I look back, that I must have made my mind up then, because as I went through those schools, as I say, I never saw anything. No brown faces in the stories, no kaupapa Māori. I think I must have made up my mind unconsciously that if I got the opportunity, if I ever write, I'll fill those gaps, that those books that I wanted to read when I was a young person. See, I grew up in a household where we had soldiers' photos on the walls, a bit like here. But that was because my grandmother, her son had got killed overseas, and some of her nephews, and they made a sort of memorial in the house to them. So you woke up to those faces of men in khaki uniforms every morning, and you heard stories about them, because they were, you know, the people who had witnessed them overseas were still alive, and you came to understand that we have our own heroes. Long story short, I went and trained as a teacher, and I came back to my old school, Manutahi, Te Whakaako Ati Ki Ngā Tamariki. And the curriculum then was, history was in the social studies curriculum. This is in the mid-1980s, and we had to teach, I remember we had these booklets about Marco Polo, George Washington, Winston Churchill. Yet outside the window of this school, Manutahi, there were par sites. The teachers in the school, and the average age of the teachers in my school, I was 22, they were in their 50s, late 50s. We had Apira Nangata's daughter, Moana Ngārimu's sister, and I was thinking to myself, why am I teaching about these people? When relevant to these children is all around us. And I think that's what started me on my journey because I went to look for resources in the library, there was nothing. So that started me on my journey to figure out how to fill the gaps. And so I wrote a history of our hapu, Teitanga Mate, and I was lucky then because the Secretary of Māori Affairs was Tā Tāmati Riri, Uncle Kiau, and I told him what I wanted to do, and I explained that the Māori Land Court records, ngā pukapuka, kai roto I te kōti whenua Māori, those old ones have the history of our people, but nobody's read them. If I could get in there and read those things and go see the old people and try and put a story together, and he allowed me to do that for 2 years. So I don't think I had an honours degree, that's about all. So I sort of stumbled into it and tried to work out how you put this thing together. And I wrote this thing. It never got published, but it was circulated among the hapu, which is who it was meant for. And the aim was that if it was successful, and it was, the Māori Affairs Department back then was going to do this across the country with its records. And then devolution hit at the end of that 2-year period. I went to the army. I had enough of being stuck in basements and things like that, and I went to the army, and I did a couple of years there. And when I came out, one of my uncles approached me, and he asked me if I would assist them, the veterans, to collect their stories. And this is 1994. Hara i te mea ko au anake. There was a group of us that got involved. Now, before I get on to this first book, this is the result, was this book, Ngā Tamatoa, which is the history of Sea Company of 28 Māori Battalion. I first want to address the most important thing I can give you tonight, desire. Doesn't matter what you want to write. First, you have to have the passion. You have to have the desire to do it against all the odds. Because when I tell you the story, you got to remember, I read comics till I got to the 4th form, war comics. All the boys at boarding school with me, that's all we read. I never read a book from cover to cover until I hit the 4th form, when a teacher or a priest at my school gave me this book, and he must have saw some potential in me. And he said, hey, try this. It was a story about a woman called Lillian Roth, who was an alcoholic Hollywood a movie actress. Why he gave me that book, I don't know. But I did. I read it from cover to cover, the first book I ever read. And if there's anything I can give you, you've got to read. You just got to read. I remember Ranginui Walker, Dr. Ranginui Walker. I asked him one day, he was our hero when I was young, because the Ka Whawhai Tonu Mātou, that book. I asked him, how did you get so good at putting these words on paper? That's what he told me. He said, you'll get as good as me if you read. Just read everything. And I used to think, I don't want to read and get clouded and coloured by those authors. But now I understand you have to read them to understand how they construct their stories. You may not want to do it that way, but at least you've got ideas, and your vocab starts to increase. At first I didn't understand half of it, but then I started looking in the dictionary to see what that word meant without realising I was growing my vocab. Now, I've thought about it a lot. In English you would say, whence comes this thing, desire? No whē tēnei me te hia. And ki au e whakaro ana, nā te kaihanga I whakatō te kākano ki roti a koe, and ko tō mahi, te whāngai atu I te kākano, kia tipu ake he rākau whai hua. That's what I believe. I believe it's in me, my desire to write history, because something put it there. And you'll all know this. When I was 12, I saw Ngā Tamatoa, a glimpse of it. I didn't see the cover or anything, but I knew it was a book, a big book, and it was about the Māori battalion in World War II. I saw it when I was a 12-year-old, but it was just a glimpse. And back then, I hadn't read a book, didn't know how to write. I just pushed it away. And then a few years later, the idea came back to me. And why I'm telling you this is because some of you people in this room know what I'm talking about. You've had something given to you that you think, no, I could never do that. I was like that. I got expelled from school, secondary school. So, I'm proof that you can do. If you knew my life, I might look good here now, but if you knew my life, you'd think he could never do that. In fact, the principal of my school, Hatapaora, the day he kicked us out, 4 of us, on the way out the door, because he called me and said, you're going home, you've shown that you don't want to be here. He said to me as I walked out the door, he said, and by the way, Soutar, I turned around to my Pākehā principal, I said, yes, Father, and he said, you will never amount to anything. And I didn't realise then he was using reverse psychology. Because he knew the type of person I was. Don't say that to me, because I'll come back and I'll prove you wrong. So it comes down to desire and hearing that little voice that's telling you what you're supposed to be doing. Kei roto I te ngā karaipiture, te pukapuka o matu, te rā te kupu whakarite parable, mō ngā taranata, the parable of the talents. Nā, kei roto I te rā kupu whakarite, ka tukuna e te atua, he taranata ki tēnā o tātou. I don't know if you know this story about the parable of the talents. So this big rich dude, he gives to his ki ana pononga, his servants, a certain amount of money. And the currency in those days was called talents. Now, if you understand the parable, it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So it's ironic that the name of the money should be talents. And he gives 5 to one, 3 to the other, and he gives 1 to the third one. He goes off to a far-off country, and he comes back expecting them to have grown their talents. And he asks the first one, and he's doubled his 5 to 10. And ka mea ki te pononga, pononga pai, pononga pono. Good and faithful servant. To the second, he asks how did he go with the 3, and he's doubled it to 6. But it comes to the third one, the one who only had 1. I keri e te whenua, I huna te taranata ki raro I te whenua. He was so afraid of his boss, this rangatira, that he buried the talent so that he'd still at least have that when he came back. And so the boss says, well, you're a bad servant. Take that talent from him and give it to the one who's got the 10. Ko te ngako o te kōrero. You know, the crux of the story is that we've all been given some talents. You know, it mightn't be to write. It might be something else. But you've all got them, and because in that story, even the worst of us have at least got one talent. And the job, I believe, that you got on earth is to try and figure out what that talent is and how to grow it. And grow it into something useful, which is what I cottoned on to. You know, I went to university. I went back to university to learn how to write. But I was there till about 2000. No offense to academics, but I decided I have got to get out of here and do something meaningful. and that's been my journey. I've wanted to write whatever I write, o tātou te iwi Māori, to move us forward, you know, even one step. I knew the Māori battalion after I went around and we started interviewing these Croas. I knew that story was a great role model story for our young people. But they didn't know it, and they didn't have access to it because those Croas didn't talk to anybody. Well, we better move on to the next picture. So, the whole motivation, and I didn't choose to write Ngā Tamato. My uncles came in. They asked me, if you read the introduction by Suhena Rangate to Ngā Tamato, it talks about the type of person they wanted to write the book. And I was listening to that conversation about the difference between Māori and Pākehā writers. Well, they wanted somebody who whakapapa to C Company. Nā ko C Company, timata mai tarekeha I tōrere, tai atu ki paritu I waho tūranga. So it goes from tōrere to Gisborne. And they wanted someone who had a whakapapa to that place. They wanted the person to have some military experience so they understood, and I'd been in the army. They wanted them to have some writing skills. And by that stage, I think I had a master's. So they thought that was as good as a PhD back in those days. And so they asked me to do it. Now, I didn't know then. This was 1994. I finished the book in... the research took 1994 to 2000. And 2001 to 2007, I wrote it with the help of a big team. So I didn't know it was that sort of commitment. And they didn't pay me the whole way through. That's the other thing they were looking for, was how... well, they didn't have any money. But how committed were you to the kaupapa? But it's pretty hard to say no when your uncle's lying in Italy. And your other uncles are buried all over North Africa and those places. It's difficult to say no to them. But what I wrote up there is the reason they wanted Ngā Tamato written, so that firstly our people would understand why they went to war. And then they wanted Pākehā to know why they went to war. And if you go to the next slide, they used to ask us at all our writing meetings, how did you go with the price of citizenship? And you've got Tāhina Ngata sitting there whose father coined that phrase. And we used to, us young fellas, young women, young guys, we used to try and explain what we thought it was. I always said, oh, well, you guys went off to fight. You know, you made this commitment, you paid your dues. Now we're owed. That's us young people. That's what we're thinking. We're now owed for what you did. And they wouldn't explain it to us. They were hoping we would find out ourselves. But in the end, as you read in Ngā Tamatoa, the explanation of the price of citizenship, as it was explained to us in Article 3 of the Treaty of Waitangi, Māori are promised the rights of British citizenship, the full rights of British citizenship. And the reason they win is because there are obligations and expectations of citizens of a country. So that if there's a war on and your country's being called, you shouldn't have to be told to go, you should volunteer freely. So the Māori Battalion is the only voluntary unit in the New Zealand Division in World War II. All volunteers. That's what makes them unusual. All volunteers, because they understood that they were committing to their obligations as citizens of this country with no expectation of rewards. That was made clear to us. They didn't go over there expecting anything. They're going to do their duty. If there's bonuses when you come back, good and well. But they did say that when they came back, the Māori politicians could then argue in the corridors of power for change, because they had fronted up alongside their Pākehā brothers overseas. If they hadn't have done that, how much more difficult would it have been? And I wonder, would we have the Waitangi Tribunal today if our men didn't serve in World War II? So, the price of citizenship, Ngā Tamatoa, and it was published in 2008. It's got over 1,000 photographs in it. See, when you get a Māori to write a history, the Māori knows what the Māori reader wants. Because I know from my own reading, I always used to like looking at pictures. But we told our publishers we need to put every man who served in our company, and that was 950, into that book. And they go, oh, that's never been done before. Why would you do that? I said, because every whānau is going to want that book based on that one photo of their grandfather, of their uncle. And sometimes that 30 people in the whānau, your book's going to sell. So that's what's the remarkable thing about it, and why I think people have gone for that book. Similarly to Tāwira, he's written the B Company book, did the same thing, put everybody's whānau photos in there, and achieved the same success. We always wanted it to be in Te Reo Māori. And after it was published, they said, now you can do it, because they thought they were all going to die off by the time the book was published, but now you can do it in Māori. So, ko taku mahi, te whakakaukau i ngā tohunga Māori, tohunga i te reo Māori, no te tairāwhiti. So I went around asking all the uncles and aunties who, one, te reo Māori was their native tongue, two, they grew up during the Second World War, so they had been born in the 30s or the 20s, and asked them would they come take a chapter of the book and translate it. And same process that I had, and we can't pay you. But ngāwari ake, to them, a lot of these translators, their fathers were the men in the battalion, or their brothers. You know, so we had people like Api Mahuika, Koro Jews, Tamati Reedy, Tilly Reedy, Keita Walker, Ethel McPherson. There's about 15 of them. Willie Carr, Chossie Carr. I think there's about 4 left today. Kaupa Bāroha, and they translated the book, and it took us about 3 years. And what they used to do was they would come together in wānanga, they'd translate a chapter, and they'd read that chapter out in front of all the other translators to make sure they had got the reo of the 1940s. And that was very challenging when you got your your peers there critiquing it as it went. And the reason I put that email address up there is because the only place you can get the Māori version of that book is in Gisborne in the C Company House. They're the only ones left with the books. So, and I think it's $50 for each of those, the Māori and the English. The Māori is a replica of the English, so those studying te reo, especially te reo te tairāwhiti, email that address. Me haere tonu. After I finished, after we got the translation done, the government was marking the centenary of the First World War, which started in 2014 and went to 2018, and they decided as part of that process they would publish a whole lot of books about the First World War. And I was working for the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, Te Monty Soutar, and as a historian I was given the task of writing the book about Māori participation in the First World War, Whitiki Whiti, which was the call to arms that they used in the First World War. And the government wanted New Zealanders to appreciate the contribution that New Zealanders had made to the First World War. I was determined that this book would be the biggest of all the books that were written for the centenary. And so I kept writing, and it was 2019 when it got published, and I think they were over me by then, the ministry. But it is. Because I wondered, when you look at it on the bookshelf, when you look at the spine, it's bigger than all the other volumes that we did. And there's 1,000 photographs in that one too. Because I explained to them, we need to put the photos of the men who served in there. And, you know, they were saying, the due date has passed, the due date has passed. And I said, two more photos. And they said, there's no more white space on the page. I said, I found a space on page 360. And they go, you know, we're over this. And I said, the family who owns this photograph, it's going to make all the difference to them. You know, again, you know, that's Māori thinking. And that's one of the advantages, I think, if we're writing our own stuff, we know what we want. I saw Hamu over there. Kia ora hau. And I'm thinking right now about that book, Manahi. You know, I think about where we come from. You know, we got Ngāti Mu and Ngata and all that. You got your own heroes. You know, over here, Johnny Rogers. Was it Hinga Grant? Hane Manahi, that story is amazing. You know, if you have been to Takruna, as I have, and you understand, if you got a military background like me, and you understand what those guys did up there, it is incredible. And what I realise is those are our heroes. Those are the ones that our kids should be learning about in the curriculum, as opposed to, you know, these other, you know, and they're heroic men too, but they're not ours. And so, you know, I encourage you to look within for your role models. So, now this is to inspire those budding writers. So I've written this Kawai, this novel. I'll be talking about it later in the week, but Monty over there was asking me, oh yeah, you've written fiction. I said, well, when you read it, half of it's not actually fiction. It's a real story, but it's been told as a novel. And it uses a Māori way, I think, a Māori way of thinking. So you've got a whakatauki at the beginning of every chapter that encapsulates what's really in the chapter. It's pre-colonial, so it tells what our world was like before Captain Cook got here. But in one of these chapters, it's got this uncle talking to the nephew, and he's educating him on how he should live life, and he says to him, "E whai mahi hira ana I te moana waipu." Great deeds are done in deep waters. It's the translation for that. Te moana waipu. Well, Monty Soutar told me that's the black blue deep of the sea. And once you get out there, well, there's all sorts of risks and dangers when you go that far out. And I guess why I raise this is you want to remember that whakatauki for any of you who, budding writers, because there are challenges coming with you attempting to write a book. Pou is right, you've got to write every day, just write, and you've got to read. But you've also got to work yourself through the challenges. You know, if you stay on the shore, which is the uncle, that's what the uncle told the nephew. If you stay close to the shore, you're safe. But if you go out there into the deep and take the risk, that's when the great things will happen. And I know in my own story. I look great. I've told you about all these books. How, you know, I almost lost my wife at one point in committing to this. And, you know, noho pōhara mo te wā roa. And the amount of people who said it can't be done. Those are the ones you've got to watch out for, the naysayers, who will tell you, when you tell them I'm going to do this, they'll tell you you can't because nobody wants you to get ahead and be successful. And that's what he means by the deep, te moana waipu. If you're going to do it, you're going to live in that, out there in the deep water, and you're going to survive out there. But, you know, and if you fail, so what? You know, if it's me, if I fail, I do it again. You know, this book, Kāwai, I think there's about 50,000 words that just got cut in my attempts to write it. And I couldn't have given up when the publisher said to me, no, that's not a novel, that's non-fiction. You're writing like you did when you were a historian. I could have given up when they said that, but I didn't. You know, I just knew if you persevere, because I took 3 years to get university entry, 3 years. I knew if you persevere, you can get there. And that's what you have to remember. Persevere. Don't listen to what anybody says the first time, the second time. And as I said, if you fail, so what? It's better than not having tried. Because that's the greatest regret to go to your grave with, is that I didn't try. Maybe I could have. Whenora, whera ku whakaro mo tēnei pō, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tātou tīpuna whare, tāne whakapiripiri nā te mea he wāwai taki tēnei ki roto I tēnei whare o tātou mō reira ki menei taku I mea tuki ai. O mea tua kia tātou katoa, kua tai mai nei I te whakarongo ki nā tahunga whakao nei a tātou me pēhe te tui puka. O mea tua nā tātou. Ko taku pātai. Nā te mea, I pakeke mai a hau I roto I tētai kāinga tino wāhi muke. Ana, ia hau mai ia hau nohi ana, ko pakeke mai a hau I roto I te āhua tana, I whakataunia mai te pākea ki roto I a mātou te tangata whenua. Ko taku pātai. Pēhea, ka tuhi ana hau, puka, pāna ki te kaikiri o te tangata, ki te tangata whenua. Pēhea o rā āhua tana, ka tiro ni anō te Marae kāhara ane, koe rā taku pātai. Nā te mea, koe rā noa te mea kai te mōhoi o hau I pakeke mai o I toko I te rā āhua tana. I nā enei, ko tēno nui, te rā mea te kaikiri ki roto I a mātou, ko mātou anō ki a mātou. Kia ora.
Pakeke koe I whē. Pakeke koe I whē. E tipu ake koe I whē. Kia ora. You know, when I first started writing that history of Te Teitanga Mate about my hapu, I only wrote it for them. And since then, it's started to spread, and, you know, with they Pākehā, ko Pānuitia, I don't know how they got hold of it, but, you know, they want to know more. But I always tell them, no, well, I didn't do it for you. I did it so that our young people knew their history. And that's what my thinking would be, that it's for you all. It's for ngā whakatipuranga ke te heke mai. Tēnei me te kaikiri. O kei roto I taku puka kei te tuitui nei. Kāwai namarua, we get to colonisation. And there's some hard truths that people have in this country have got to hear about. The only reason I wrote the first book about pre-colonisation is because I thought, oh well, if I'm going to bear some truths in this book about colonisation, we first have to understand what was the society like before they were colonised. And when you read Kāwai, you know, it's a takes you back to a beautiful world, but there's some dark undercurrents in it as well. And we got some, things that we're not proud of. But I thought, well, balance. Do that there, then I can do what I'm about to do in the book about colonisation. That's what I think. I think first write for your own. First write for your own. And I always believe that if you can reach them, then Pākehā, it's going to appeal to them too. They're going to receive it in a way that they mightn't have if you didn't aim at that audience. Kawe was firstly written for, I thought about my children. And I thought, they don't understand the world I grew up in. And I was only born in 1961. They don't understand that world. They live in a different world. They're not interested in mā kōrero tuku iho. So I thought I'll put it down in a book so that it's there for them. But funnily enough, the book sold amazingly to Pākehā who are reading it. And I don't quite understand why. Maybe it's given them some insight into our world. Maybe it's my credibility because I'm a historian. They think it's all true. Actually, I did such a good job of it, my cousins think it's true. And I say, hey, no, I made a lot of the stuff up. But that's te rape. That's the best advice I can give. But I also want to say, do it. Do it, yeah, tuia. Yeah.
Truth, then nobody's going to get healed by lies or evasion. So I think at the end of the day, tell the truth and be safe within yourself. And then others who read your truth will be safe within themselves. But I never ever evade truth. And it is true to say the truth will set you free.
Tika. The old fella Moni told me that he was a carver or wharenui. He said a lot of people come and criticise me about my carvings, and I always asked him, have you carved a house? And kei wheke tō whare. And when you have, then you come talk to me. And so that's another thing I think too is, people, I've had a little bit of criticism about some of the stuff I've written. And I asked the same thing, well, if you've got another version you disagree, write your own.
Kāre au he pātai, but he story. Pai ki o koutou katoa. I was born at the whakarewa o te opataua a Waihia, Waka for short. I'm a peony diver, naturally blonde. But when I was growing up, when you're knee-high to a grasshopper, I used to see a lot of my uncles return servicemen. The best time to see them was to go to the guys around about Christmas time. They could sing. They could. They would all come outside of the pub and sing from outside. And it was beautiful. But for a long time while I was growing up, even in my teenage years, right up to adulthood, I used to wonder why all my uncles were always going to the pub. But all I saw them do was drink. They all sat together and drank. I never saw them fight amongst themselves. Other people may have, but I never ever saw them fight amongst themselves. It wasn't until I got a bit older then I realised 28th Māori Battalion, they saw too much while they were at war. There was no debriefing, nothing when they came back from war. And I think that was right across the board for all our soldiers, whether you're Māori or Pākehā. There was no debriefing, and that's how they were able to release, these are my own thoughts only, to release all those bad thoughts that they had or what they had seen during the war. Now, just to carry on a bit further, one of my uncles from here, his photo is on the wall. Actually, Hane Manahi's photo is on this wall too. But I used to see him chasing cats, whether they were in his house or outside. He'll grab a broom and chase them. This way, I used to watch him all the time. Then one day I asked my cousins, why does Uncle chase the cats? They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. And they said to me, he was a prisoner of war, and that was their food. You know, you ate anything you could get your hands on, and those were maybe his bad memories. I don't know. That's all I've got up to talk about. Thank you.
Hei whakakapi taku kōrero. I was going to sing a song, battalion song, but I thought I'd tell you a story about that I heard from the veterans. Hei kinaki mo taku kōrero. You know, when you train in the army on a rifle range, when you're learning to shoot rifles, they have what's called a butt scan. So you have, it might be about sometimes 300 meters away, you have a little embankment, and you put your targets up on top of that embankment, and you have the butts gang down the bottom, and their job is to see where the bullets are landing on a target. And when I was training, anyhow, you'd have this pole, and it'd have a round black circle on it, and so the firing would happen. You'd maybe shoot 5 rounds, and then the butts gang put up the black circle, and they move it to which side of the target the grouping is falling of those rounds. Now, if they're missing completely, there's no grouping, they'll do this, wave it, so you, 300 meters away, realize that you're missing the target, you need to change your sights. Okay, understanding that. So the 28 Māori Battalion are overseas in North Africa, and I interviewed this man named Bully Jackson. He was living in Raumati at the time, but he was an officer in C Company. And one of the questions I asked him was, when was the moment you were most afraid when you got over there? And he said, when the first time we went out into the desert and we were under live fire. And he said, I was lying down there, I was green. He said, I'd been posted to this platoon of Ngātis who, they'd seen a fair bit of action. He said they weren't so afraid, but I was, first time hearing shells. Or bullets being fired over my head and shells dropping ahead of us. And he said, this is the humour of the Māori soldier. He said, that was going on for about half an hour, and he said, I'm like this scared. And I look up, because I'm the officer, and see if my men are all right, and they're lying about 7 metres apart, about 30 of them. And he said, all he could hear was this laughing. And he looked up, and one of his men had taken off his pack the entrenching tool. It's a short shovel, like that. And he had his head down, and the Germans were firing, and he had his spade up going. And he said, only Māoris could think of doing that in the middle of a war. Kāti, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora tātai hoi anō, ko mutu ngā mahi o te pō. Mehe he kōrero, he pātai, he ha atu nā tētai. Tukuna mai nai nei. Ki te kore, ka haere tātou ki tērā whare. O kei a te mākoha.
Tēnā koutou. Yes, Arapine is quite right. The wharekai is calling, but I wonder if we've had an adequate opportunity to say thank you to these two gentlemen, and certainly in between the two speakers, the opportunity had passed before we had actually really properly acknowledged Pou. So I'm just bringing it to your attention, and I'm thinking as I look around the room that there are plenty of people who could probably cobble together a song or something as our tribute to our two speakers tonight. So, koutou rā. You can all fight about who leads that, but I'll just put that idea to you now, because when that's done, we will go and have supper and talk to them some more.
Monty, te maro mai koe, pēhea tawa wea tau kui hei tae mai ki kone. I te whakatuhera tanga tō mātai wharekai, te awa horo. He mea takoha mai, e ngā wharekana ki o te Teirawhiti, kia mata, ki ngā wharekana ki a kone, he mea takoha mai ki te iwi. I honga inga e rātou, te wea tā tūrirara, kia mātou na taku kuia, nā kato, te wahanga tua ta hi tāpiri atu, e hanga i puai kia mātou kia ngā tira kuwe. Engari, ka pai, Auntie, nā tērā, i rohe, mātou te weta, i te mā, te pai anau, o tō tā, a tērā weta. Engari, kia kōrua, he mihi nui tēnei, kia kōrua, i te atāhua o ngā kōrua, te atāhua hoki o ngā tuhinga, ko tā mātou i nānei, he rapurapu hāre, he kimi hāre, ki hea hoko ai ue rāpukapu. Kia kōrua, he mihi nui tēnei kia kōrua, o tira kia kūtau tira. Ai pia mohanau, harai te mako koe, kā. Ko koe, me te nui o hapu o iwi muri a koe, o koe, a me te nui hoki o iwi, o hapu o waka, a kai muri a koe. Ngari kōrua, tēnā rawatu kōrua, te pēnei mai tuto ki au, a ki te tohotohi e nei kōrua, ko ranga tira rangi wewe hia kōrua, tēnā kōrua.
Mai